There are paintings that show faith as something radiant, calm, and unquestioned. And then there are paintings that focus on the exact moment when faith hesitates, when belief is not easy, and when certainty must pass through doubt before it can become real. The Incredulity of Saint Thomas belongs to that second kind. It is one of the most intimate and unsettling scenes in religious art, because it is built around a question that never stops haunting human beings. What does it take to believe? Is hearing enough? Is seeing enough? Or must we touch the wound ourselves? That is what makes this subject so powerful. It is not only about a biblical miracle, it is about the tension between doubt and conviction, between the need for proof and the desire for faith. In this scene, Saint Thomas does not stand far away in abstract contemplation. He leans in, he looks closely, he reaches toward the body of Christ. The moment is physical, concentrated, and almost uncomfortable in its closeness. This is not faith from a distance. It is faith tested at the edge of flesh. At first glance, the scene is simple. Christ has returned after the resurrection and appears before his disciples. Thomas, who had doubted the reports of that resurrection, refuses to believe unless he can see and touch the wounds for himself. He does not want rumor, hope, or second-hand testimony. He wants evidence. He wants the truth to stand before him in a form he cannot deny. And when Christ appears, he invites Thomas to do exactly what Thomas demanded. He offers the wound. He allows doubt to come as close as it needs to come. That invitation is one of the most extraordinary moments in Christian art and thought. Christ does not reject Thomas for doubting. He does not drive him away for demanding proof. Instead, he meets him where he is. He allows faith to emerge through encounter. This is why the scene has remained so important for centuries. It understands something difficult and profoundly human. Doubt is not always the opposite of faith. Sometimes it is the road through which faith becomes honest. That is also why the image resonates far beyond religious tradition, even for those who do not approach it devotionally. The Incredulity of Saint Thomas captures a universal human experience. People want to believe in love, truth, promises, justice, and meaning, but they are also wounded by uncertainty. They want something solid, something visible, something that can be verified. Thomas becomes more than a disciple in this moment. He becomes the human mind itself, unable to rest in easy answers, longing for certainty and yet almost afraid of what certainty might demand. In many depictions of the subject, including the most famous ones, the composition is intensely close. There is little distraction, little background, little decorativo. The figures crowd together around the wound. Heads lean in, eyes narrow with concentration, hands part fabric, flesh is exposed. The viewer feels almost uncomfortably near. This closeness matters because the entire power of the subject depends on intimacy. Thomas is not contemplating doctrine. He is confronting a body. The resurrection is not presented as a distant theological idea. It is presented as scarred flesh standing in front of him. That scar is the emotional center of the scene. In Christian thought, the wound of Christ is both proof of suffering and proof of survival. It shows that the body before Thomas is not an illusion, not a ghost, not a symbol floating free of pain. It is the same body that was crucified, now living again. The wound, therefore, becomes paradoxical. It is the mark of death and the sign that death did not win. Thomas's hand approaches not only injury, but mystery. The scar becomes the place where trauma and transcendence meet. This is one of the reasons artists were drawn so strongly to the subject. It gave them an opportunity to paint one of the most difficult and profound tensions in religious experience. Faith often asks for trust beyond proof, yet human beings are creatures of senses, evidence, and touch. Thomas stands precisely at that intersection. He is not content with words. He wants experience. In visual art, that need becomes extraordinarily powerful because painting itself is a medium of seeing. A painting about doubt that demands sight becomes a meditation on the act of looking itself. The expressions of the figures are crucial here. Christ is often calm, patient, almost solemn in his acceptance of Thomas's need. Thomas, by contrast, appears absorbed, intent, astonished, and deeply focused. The other disciples lean in with their own mixture of curiosity and amazement. Their faces are not decorative additions. They form a circle of concentrated human attention. Everyone is looking at the same point, the wound. as if all thought and all spiritual tension in the room had collapsed into that one visible opening in the body. The result is one of the most powerful images of collective witness in art. What makes the scene even more compelling is that it does not humiliate doubt. Thomas is not mocked as a fool. He is not painted as an enemy of truth. He is painted as someone who cannot pretend belief before belief becomes real inside him. That honesty gives the subject its unusual emotional force. In many religious images, sanctity appears through certainty. Here, sanctity emerges through struggle. Thomas's doubt is not noble in itself, but it becomes the condition through which a deeper recognition is. This is why the subject feels so modern. The modern mind often distrusts inherited certainty. It asks for proof. It hesitates before mystery. It is uneasy with claims that cannot be examined. Thomas therefore feels strangely contemporary. He is not content to repeat what others say. He needs direct contact with truth. At the same time, the scene gently suggests that proof alone does not complete the experience. Thomas can touch the wound, but what transforms him is not merely physical evidence. It is the encounter with the living Christ who permits that touch. The scene is therefore not a victory of skepticism over faith. It is a transformation of skepticism inside relationship. The physical gesture of touching also gives the image enormous symbolic richness. To touch a wound is to come into contact with pain, history, and vulnerability. Thomas does not merely verify that Christ lives. He verifies that the risen Christ still bears the marks of suffering. Resurrection does not erase the wound. It includes Italiano. This gives the painting a depth that reaches far beyond its biblical context. It suggests that truth is not always smooth, untouched, or sealed off from injury. Sometimes what is most real still carries scars. That idea may be the deepest reason the image has endured. People do not simply doubt because they are stubborn. Often they doubt because life has wounded them, because certainty has failed them before, because they know too much about loss to trust easily. In that sense, Thomas is not only asking whether Christ is alive, he is asking whether hope itself can survive contact with reality. Christ answers not by hiding the wound, but by revealing it. The message is not that truth has no scars. The message is that even scarred truth can still be alive. That is why the incredulity of Saint Thomas remains one of the most moving and intellectually rich subjects in religious art. It does not present faith as something naive or effortless. It presents faith as something that must sometimes pass through examination, closeness, and even trembling uncertainty. It shows doubt not as a final destination, but as a threshold, and it turns a single wounded body into the place where disbelief, wonder, and recognition collide. What makes the incredulity of Saint Thomas so extraordinary is not only the story it tells, but the way it transforms a spiritual question into a physical encounter. Many religious images ask the viewer to contemplate mysteries that remain distant, elevated, or symbolic. This one does the opposite. It brings the mystery close enough to touch. The resurrection is not shown through heavenly light, vast landscapes, or triumphant distance. It is shown through a wound in flesh, a hand reaching inward, and a group of men leaning so close that the entire scene feels almost invasive. That intimacy is exactly what gives the image its force. The power of the scene begins with Thomas himself. He is often remembered simply as the doubting disciple, but that description is too small. What makes Thomas compelling is that he refuses inherited certainty. He does not reject truth because he wants darkness. He resists belief because belief matters too much to him to be accepted carelessly. He cannot rest in rumor. Even if the rumor is hopeful, he needs encounter. He needs reality to stand before him in a way that does not collapse under pressure. In that sense, Thomas is not weak. He is demanding honesty from faith. That demand makes him one of the most psychologically rich figures in religious art. Many people recognize themselves in him, even without sharing the same theological background. Human beings often want to believe, but they also fear being deceived. They want assurance, but they know how easily hope can be shattered. Thomas therefore becomes more than a biblical character. He becomes the figure of the wounded mind, the conscience that hesitates, the person who cannot say yes until yes has been tested. That emotional truth is one reason the image has remained so alive for centuries. Christ's response is just as important. He does not shame Thomas for needing proof. He does not answer doubt with distance or punishment. Instead, He offers himself more completely. He opens the garment. He reveals the wound. He allows Thomas to come near. This changes the emotional meaning of the scene entirely. Doubt is not met with rejection, but with disclosure. Faith is not forced through command, but invited through presence. This is one of the most remarkable aspects of the subject. It suggests that truth does not always fear examination. Sometimes it becomes more powerful when it submits itself to it. The wound at the center of the image is therefore much more than evidence. It is a meeting point between suffering and revelation. It proves that Christ was crucified, but it also proves that the crucified one now stands alive. The wound is both memory and miracle. It marks a body that has passed through death without erasing the history of pain. This gives the image extraordinary depth. In many systems of thought, wounds are signs of weakness, defeat, or ruin. Here the wound becomes the place where truth is confirmed. Scar and glory inhabit the same body. This paradox may be the deepest reason the subject remains so moving. People often imagine truth as something untouched, complete, and free of damage. But the incredulity of Saint Thomas presents another possibility. What is most real may still bear scars. What is risen may still show suffering. What is divine may not erase vulnerability, but transfigure it. That idea reaches far beyond Christian doctrine. It speaks to human experience in a profound way. Many people come to belief, trust, or healing not through the absence of wounds, but through learning how to recognize life within them. The compositional structure of the scene reinforces this meaning. In many great versions of the subject, the figures are tightly grouped, their heads almost touching, their bodies bent inward toward a single point of focus. This creates an extraordinary sense of concentration. The entire world of the painting seems to narrow to one gesture, the movement of Thomas's hand toward the wound. There is no wasted space. No broad scenery diffuses the tension. Everything exists for the sake of this encounter. The result is a kind of visual compression in which thought, doubt, faith, and proof all gather around one visible opening in the flesh. The viewer is affected by that compression as well. Looking at the painting becomes an almost physical experience. We are drawn toward the same point as the disciples. We look where they look. We lean inward with them. The painting, therefore, does not merely show Thomas examining Christ. It makes the viewer participate in the act of examination. This is a brilliant strategy because it turns the audience into a second Thomas. We, too, are asked to look closely. We, too, are made to confront the wound. We, too, must ask, what kind of truth is being shown to us? That participation gives the subject a special place in art history. It becomes not only a representation of a biblical event, but a meditation on the very nature of painting. Painting invites sight. It creates visible surfaces that ask to be trusted. In the Incredulity of Saint Thomas, the act of seeing becomes the central issue. Can sight produce belief? Does the eye settle what the mind cannot? Or does the eye only bring us to the edge of a deeper mystery? The painting never answers these questions in a simplistic way. It presents proof, but it also presents wonder. It offers evidence, but not reduction. The other disciples matter in this process too. They do not stand back as passive witnesses. They lean in with intensity, sharing Thomas's focus. Their faces reflect curiosity, astonishment, and concentration. They form a human circle around the event, a small community organized by attention. This detail adds another layer of meaning. Faith may pass through personal doubt, but it is also witnessed within a community. Thomas's struggle is individual, yet not isolated. Others are present at the moment of recognition. The scene suggests that the search for truth is deeply personal, but rarely solitary. Another reason the image feels so powerful is that it treats the body seriously. In many religious traditions, the body can become secondary to spirit, almost an obstacle to transcendence. Here, the body is indispensable. The whole drama depends on flesh, skin, wound, hand, and touch. This does not reduce the spiritual to the material. It reveals that the spiritual has chosen to become accessible through the material. The resurrection is not presented as escape from embodiment, but as transformed embodiment. That is a radical and emotionally potent claim, and artists found in it enormous visual power. This seriousness about the body also makes the scene psychologically modern. Doubt is often rooted in the senses. People ask to see, to hear, to measure, to touch. Thomas's need is therefore not merely ancient, It is permanently human. What the scene adds is the possibility that the senses do not stand outside faith, but may become one of its thresholds. Thomas reaches through touch toward belief, but what he discovers is more than the hand can explain. The proof is physical, yet the recognition that follows exceeds physical proof alone. That is why the incredulity of Saint Thomas continues to resonate so deeply. It is not simply about skepticism defeated by evidence. It is about the transformation of doubt when truth becomes personally encounterable. It shows that faith may begin not in easy certainty, but in the courage to look closely, to ask honestly, and to remain open when the answer appears. The wound at the center of the painting becomes more than proof of suffering. It becomes the place where disbelief, longing, and revelation meet. The lasting power of the incredulity of Saint Thomas comes from the fact that it is never only a biblical episode about one disciple and one miracle. It is a painting about the human need to know, the fear of being deceived, and the longing for a truth that can survive examination. That is why the subject remains so emotionally and intellectually powerful. It does not ask the viewer to choose simply between belief and unbelief. It asks, what kind of encounter can turn doubt into recognition without making either experience feel false? One reason the scene has remained so compelling across centuries is that Thomas is not treated as a villain. He is not portrayed as spiritually corrupt or morally empty. He is presented as someone who cannot force himself into conviction before conviction becomes real. That honesty gives him unusual dignity. In many narratives, doubt is dismissed as weakness. Here, doubt becomes the beginning of a deeper confrontation with truth. Thomas is not the disciple who hates faith. He is the disciple who refuses to counterfeit it. That distinction is crucial, and it is one reason so many viewers continue to feel close to him. This closeness is especially strong in the modern world, where inherited certainties often feel unstable. People are accustomed to questioning authority, examining claims, and withholding belief until something persuades them. Thomas therefore feels surprisingly contemporary. He wants more than tradition, more than testimony, more than the comfort of the group. He wants direct contact with reality. The fact that this desire is met not with condemnation but with revelation gives the subject enduring force. It suggests that the search for truth, when sincere, may itself become a path to it. At the same time, the scene does not glorify doubt as a permanent state. Thomas's skepticism matters because it leads somewhere. He is not trapped in disbelief for its own sake. His questioning is serious because he is still open to answer. That is one of the deepest tensions in the image. Doubt can be honest, but it cannot become an idol. It must remain capable of recognition. Thomas reaches toward the wound not merely to preserve his uncertainty, but to resolve it. The painting, therefore, becomes a meditation not on cynicism, but on transformation. That transformation is inseparable from the body of Christ. The wound remains central because it concentrates so many meanings at once. It is the mark of violence, but also the sign of survival. It is proof that suffering happened, but also proof that suffering did not end the story. This is why the wound has such unusual symbolic depth. It shows that the risen body is not a rejection of history, but a body that carries history within it. The past is not erased. It is transfigured. For many viewers, this is one of the most moving aspects of the entire scene. The truth Thomas encounters is not spotless perfection. It is wounded life. That idea has immense emotional reach beyond theology. Human beings often imagine healing as a disappearance of all pain, all scars, all traces of damage. But the incredulity of Saint Thomas suggests something more profound. What is healed may still bear marks. What is alive may still show what it has endured. This gives the image a universal human resonance. Many people do not learn trust through untouched innocence, but through surviving brokenness without losing themselves entirely. In that sense, the wound becomes not only evidence of Christ, his resurrection, but an image of how truth and suffering can coexist. The subject also remains powerful because it places seeing and touching at the center of belief. This gives the painting a unique role in art history. It reflects on the senses, or using the senses. The viewer looks at a painting about looking. The eye follows Thomas toward the wound, and in doing so becomes part of the drama. The image, therefore, does not simply represent an act of verification. It recreates one. The audience is drawn into the same tension between doubt and recognition. We are not passive spectators. We become participants in the search. This participation is what makes the painting so difficult to forget. We do not simply watch Thomas test the truth. We feel ourselves doing it with him. We examine the wound with our eyes. We measure the calm of Christ against the intensity of Thomas. We observe the other disciples, leaning in with concentration. The painting becomes a small theater of human attention, all directed toward one scarred opening in the body. In that concentration, something remarkable happens. The outward simplicity of the scene begins to open into philosophical and spiritual depth. The image asks not only whether Thomas believes, but how any person ever comes to believe anything that truly matters. Another reason the scene endures is that it preserves the tension between evidence and mystery. Thomas receives the proof he asked for, but the moment does not become a cold victory of him. The truth before him is visible and touchable, yet it remains extraordinary. The resurrection is not reduced to a mechanical fact. It remains a mystery encountered through flesh. This balance is one of the great strengths of the subject. It honors the need for evidence without pretending that evidence alone explains everything. The mind is satisfied, but the soul is also startled. Artists were drawn again and again to this balance because it allowed them to paint both realism and transcendence in the same scene. The folds of skin, the opening of the wound, the closeness of faces, the weight of bodies, all these details affirm material reality, yet the meaning of what is happening exceeds material explanation. The painting, therefore, becomes a bridge between the seen and the unseen. It shows that mystery does not always begin where the visible ends. Sometimes mystery is encountered at the very center of what is most concrete. This is also why the image continues to speak to people who struggle with faith. It does not demand blind trust as its first gesture. It begins with hesitation. It acknowledges the need to question. It allows the longing for certainty to be seen without contempt, and then it gently suggests that the deepest truths may not be received by force, but by encounter, by coming close enough to the wound to discover that it is not only proof of pain, but proof of life. That is why the Incredulity of Saint Thomas remains one of the most moving subjects in religious art, not simply because it tells a story of disbelief, not simply because it shows a miracle, but because it captures one of the most difficult passages in human experience, the movement from doubt to recognition, from distance to contact, from second-hand report to personal encounter. It turns a single wound into the place where faith becomes honest, and that is the final achievement of the image. It does not humiliate uncertainty, and it does not romanticize it either. It shows that doubt may be painful, searching, and necessary, but that it need not remain the final word. Thomas reaches toward the wound because he cannot believe too easily. What he finds there is not only evidence. He finds presence. He finds truth that has suffered and still lives. And that is why the scene continues to stay with the viewer long after the image is gone.